Hello everyone. Today we have the first full episode of the Detours in Music podcast featuring Dr. Heather Coltman. Enjoy.
Heather Coltman. I am the Provost and Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs.
Awesome. So can you tell us how you got your start in music?
Certainly. My mother's a pianist. She had studied to be a concert pianist. And so she says that from a very young age, when she was teaching piano lessons, I would go hide under the piano. Mm-hmm. And then I came to her once when I was 4 years old and said, now I want my lessons. Mm-hmm. So she taught me, and I was just surrounded by her teaching, her performing, her practicing. Mm-hmm. So it was a really wonderful environment to become a young musician.
Cool. I can relate to that for
yes.
sure. Can you tell us where you attended school and why?
Certainly. I did my first 2 years of undergraduate at the University of Texas in Austin, and we were living in Austin. I'd grown up in Austin, and I'd been studying with a university professor there throughout high school, and I just wanted to continue with her. And then after a couple of years, I thought, I'd like to explore and go somewhere else and change teachers. So I transferred to the Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, which is where I finished my Bachelor's of Music. And then I went to the Mannes College of Music in New York City to complete my Master of Music. And the reason I went there is my piano professor in Cincinnati was on the faculty at Mannes, and I wanted to keep studying with him. I just felt like the 2 years I'd had with him wasn't quite enough. And then after that, I took a little time off because I really didn't think I wanted to get a doctorate. But then after a year or two, I thought, no, let's do that. And by then I had got married, and my then husband and I moved back to Austin, and I enrolled at the University of Texas. Now it's called the Butler School of Music, and that's where I got my Doctorate of Musical Arts.
Awesome. This is a perfect question for you. What would you be doing if you weren't a musician?
It's a great question. I have so many things I love doing. There were quite a number of times throughout my life when I've really been interested in law. I really thought that would be fascinating to do either family law or criminal law. There was something about the legal process and then the interaction with people, and then of course the impact you can have that was totally fascinating to me. And then on a whole other side of my brain, I always wanted to be a poet and a writer and a novelist. So I've done a little bit of writing. I mean, I would call it kind of amateurish, but I'd love to do that. And there's so many other things I'm interested in, but when I seriously considered, do I not want to be a musician, it was either to be a lawyer or a poet.
That's awesome. What's something you struggled with in your undergraduate degree?
Gosh, well, it was interesting going to two different schools in my undergrad degree, very different schools, and of course the first one I was living at home, and then when I transferred I was off on my own. I was so focused on being a performer that I would skip class. I didn't do any of the sort of, group activities that music students did because I was just up in the practice room. And at the time, I was completely inspired by that and loved that. But I feel like that didn't help me in the long run because I felt like I got behind with some of the academics. And so I wouldn't say I struggled with that, but I would say that was because I was so zeroed in on what I was doing, I lost some opportunities, I think, to be a little bit broader in my education.
What's some advice you have for a younger player for whom things aren't going as expected?
So, of course, that happens to everybody in any career at all. Life is filled with surprises. I certainly can relate to that. I was doing so many piano competitions, and there were times where I was told I had played the best, and I felt that I had done great, but then I wouldn't have won a prize or anything. So, those experiences and then many others gave me the sense that becoming a musician and becoming an artist is not something that's an event, it's a process. And it's lifelong, and you are never done. So you have to be okay with never being finished, right? So if you write a book, you send the manuscript off and it's published, it's done, right? You win a court case, you may not like it, but that court case is done. The process of becoming an artist and a musician is a lifestyle, it's not a process. So I think that just keeping that in mind and just giving yourself, forgiveness and giving yourself the acceptance that, hey, every day is just a whole other exploration. There's no such thing as perfect. There's no such thing as being finished.
Yeah. Have you ever been persuaded to change career paths?
So at the very, very core of me, even now in administration, I still think of myself, number one, as a concert pianist. So my identity is very much as a musician, as a performer, and as someone steeped in music. Do I perform now? No, hardly ever. Do I practice much? No, not hardly ever, right? Am I constantly listening to music, and do I have pieces picked out that I'm going to practice? Yes. So I would say that at the core, my identity is as a musician. But as I was really involved in higher education and got more and more intrigued with what happens within a department, what happens within a university, I really got entranced by what we could do to make a bigger impact. And I think that the flip moment for me was, I can play a Chopin sonata really well, but what am I doing, right? So some people in the audience will like it. I'll feel great because I've learned this Chopin sonata and I have a wonderful relationship with that piece. But how am I changing the world, right? So I felt like I could do much more with music than simply being a performer. And I don't want to minimize what that means.
It's the fine line, yeah.
Right. So, I was really attracted to doing administration. I wanted to have an impact. I wanted to make change. And, the more you get into it, the more there were really fascinating things to learn. So I wouldn't say I left music, but I left my 100% focus on music.
So what was your musical detour? There could be more than one.
More than one. Look, I have 3 kids, and I think it's very challenging in any career to raise children, because it's at least 18 years, and you don't get that when you're pregnant. You think, oh, this is just going to be so cute to have a baby, right? And I wouldn't call it a detour because I never quit doing my music or my administration, but it's a shift of focus and energy, and definitely your whole set of priorities shifts because you realize there are these other lives, right, that are completely connected with yours. So it's sort of a detour of attention, not so much of a detour of how I spent my time. But then being provost is a detour. I knew taking this job that I was not going to be able to schedule all my concerts. Even as a dean, I was performing all the time. I did tours. I was touring Israel 3 years ago, and I knew coming here I could not keep up that level. It wouldn't be. I wouldn't have integrity. I don't want to perform and be less than how I want to be.
Yeah.
But also, I needed to give my full attention to this. So I consider this job sort of a detour. Although I do go home and play piano, and I do have some concerts scheduled, it's just not going to be the same level of intensity and engagement.
What was your process from piano professor to provost?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting question. So as a piano professor, I also had this title of Director of Keyboard Studies, and that position and those sense of responsibilities grew because it came to be learning the curriculum, adapting the curriculum, teaching pianists about accompanying, teaching about chamber music and collaboration, teaching pedagogy, and I started a piano camp for kids, and that went strong for 25 years. And the more I did all those things, the more I saw that so much of this work requires administrative skill and requires you to have an ability to communicate with others and collaborate well and understand finances and understand marketing. And so as I got into that, and I enjoyed that kind of work, it had meaning to me, but also it was fun, right? So I think that took me into understanding how departments could work. And then at the time, we had a really great department chair, and he was retiring, and several of the faculty said, Heather, why don't you think about being department chair? I had no idea what that meant, but I was encouraged to apply, and then when I did, suddenly I had to learn about marching band, I had to learn about music education, I had to learn about choir and singers and practice rooms and facilities and how much piano tuners cost and how we have to fight for space in the performance hall. And so you take this path because you're intrigued by a field, and then suddenly there's these doors opening that you're just learning every day. And then from there, it was sort of the same situation. We had developed a School of the Arts, and I was very active in the entire college working in the arts and humanities. And then the dean at the time stepped down, and several people said, Heather, have you thought about being a dean? I'm like, but I don't know anything about sociology. I don't know anything about philosophy. And they're like, you don't have to, but, be a good leader for us. So I applied for that position, and I was really terrified, frankly, to start that because it was 213 faculty, it was 12 departments. It was all sorts of things that I had to learn, but it was so much fun learning it. And then after doing the deanship job for 6 years, I thought, this is kind of fun. Maybe I can even expand further. And so it was my own kind of curiosity and drive, but behind that always this desire to have a bigger impact. Like, how can we impact more people, and how can we ensure that what my values are and our collective values are can really be spread? Right, this is going to be fun. So I never took voice lessons. I was a violinist for many, many years, but
Me
I never
too.
took voice. Yeah. But there was a time where I was working with a couple of sopranos, and they were brilliant. One was a slightly older woman who had this beautiful, rich kind of contralto voice, and the other was this younger soprano with a much more coloratura. And the two of them were so fantastic. They developed this kind of comedy skit that they developed this little show called The Dueling Divas. And they came to me and they said, look, we need a pianist. And I'm like, hey, I'm not going to just be a pianist. I want to be a character in your show. So we invented this whole character for me. My name was Paige Turner, okay? And we had costumes, we had sets, we had a whole script, we had a director who worked with us, and it was all comedy, and it was called Opera with a Twist. It was called Dueling Divas Opera with a Twist. And we toured all over the country for about 6 years. Wow. And it was crazy because the big deal of the show was that we have this aging soprano who's kind of over the hill, and she's really jealous of this young soprano, and they get into all these battles, and they run off stage, pulling each other's wigs off, and Paige Turner is left on stage and has to save the show. So Paige Turner sits down and says, you know what, I can sing too, and launches into the Queen of the Night aria from Magic Flute.
Okay.
And the audience goes nuts because I get to steal the show.
Yes.
And then in the second half of the show, it's revealed that Paige Turner is the long-lost daughter of Liberace. And I get to sit down and put on my big glitzy rings, and we put on a candelabra, and I play some Chopin for everybody. It was so out of character, and it was so crazy and off the beaten path, but the show was really successful, and I got to explore being a comedian and being on stage and being silly and being creative in that way, and it was so much fun. That was definitely a musical detour.
That's awesome. I guess our last question is, what do you think about, the JMU School of Music and how your impact as provost has had on JMU for the past 2 years?
That's a really great question too. It's not very common for provosts to come from music. Although when there are provosts from the arts, they're from music.
Yeah.
Right? So I looked once at a word cloud that showed provosts in fields they came from. Primarily it's engineering, or it's in the STEM disciplines. A few of them are from, higher ed administration, a couple from business. Very few of us in the arts. So I know when I first got hired, some of the music faculty were like, oh my gosh, it's so exciting. We have, a musician who gets it. President Alger also is a great lover of the arts, and he was so pleased, to have another person on the vice president team who is completely passionate about the importance of the arts. So I hope that, I'm conveying a lot of the support and the belief I have that without the arts, we're nothing, right? I would love to be more involved, especially with the School of Music. I've gone to a lot of events, but it would be really fun to maybe coach some students or, perform a little bit more with students. I know we had that opportunity to perform a few months ago. So I think the longer I'm here and the more things kind of stabilize a little bit, if they ever do, it would be fun to be more involved as a music faculty member. But it is really interesting when I meet with other provosts how different it is that I have this perspective of what it's like to be a musician, and yet many of them are coming from very different fields. So one of the things I've noticed is I have a really fun sense of humor, and I like to just, make some jokes once in a while, and most provosts are really serious. So sometimes I feel like, wow, I need to get more serious, and then I'm like, no, they need to lighten up.
I hope you all enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Stay tuned for the next episode, which will feature Dr. Susan Barber, professor of bassoon at James Madison University.